Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Blog. James, good morning to you.
Morning, Andrew.
Morning.
How are you doing?
You know what? I just watched that Kai Havertz chance right towards the end of normal time.
Oh, is that the one where he sort of somehow lifts it over the goal from preposterously close range?
Yes, it's a great cross from Martin Odegaard. It's really good movement from Kai Havertz.
Yeah.
And he takes it down well. All he's got to do is just kind of nick it over the goalkeeper into the back of the net. He puts it over the bar.
But you know what, Andrew? Something tells me it might not have been at Kai Havertz's day yesterday.
You think? Don't think it's been his week, to be honest. I wonder, has he had in his professional career a worse week? I mean, maybe he has, but in terms of the chances he missed against Newcastle, chances he missed yesterday, missing a penalty, you could see it was really affecting him at the end there.
Yeah. He was straight off down the tunnel. Not a happy boy, and understandably so. I mean, a terrible week for Arsenal, and on a personal level for Kai Havertz, a really bad one.
Yeah.
I must say, you know, when he stepped up to take that penalty, I was worried for him, given the week he'd had. And I was sat in my seat in the press box, and when that penalty was saved, I literally slid to the floor of the press box. I was just like, please, I want to be anywhere else but here in this moment.
Against all the conventions of the press box where you're supposed to be...
It must have looked bizarre, to be honest. I sort of slid down the chair onto my knees and then like backwards onto the floor. But it was the physical expression of how I felt in that moment, Andrew. What can I say?
Yeah, we'll come to that, I guess. There's a fair bit to get to before we go into that. It was quite funny. Well, funny, I don't know if funny is the right word, but I was just checking my notifications on Blue Sky, and arsenalireland.bsky.social says, if you're waiting for the latest Arsecast therapy, may I suggest listening to this? After last year's third round exit, pretty much the same story. And the description of the podcast that day on the 8th of January 2024 was, in this episode, we look back on the 2-0 FA Cup third round defeat to Liverpool. We analyse a first half in which Arsenal played well, did a lot right, but failed to make the most of the chances they created. It's a familiar theme, and one which came back to haunt us as late goals from the Mug Smashers condemned us to an FA Cup exit at a frustratingly early stage again. Not quite the same because of how this game transpired and some of the things that happened, but in the same sort of ballpark, isn't it? And the issue, I think, for me anyway, this is a game that the issue was finishing rather than creativity per se. It was about finishing yesterday, because we'll get to it, I'm sure, but I think there were more than enough chances for Arsenal to win this game and put this game to bed, but the fact we didn't left the door open for a Manchester United team who defended quite well, pretty obstinate, and, you know, did us from the penalty spot in the end.
Yeah, it is spooky, isn't it? How many parallels there are between this game and Wednesday night's game against Newcastle, and then also, as you point out, where we were 12 months ago. I mean, this was very reminiscent of the kinds of performances that we saw, you know, in those defeats against Fulham, particularly West Ham at home, that Liverpool FA Cup game that you cited. I don't know what happens at this time of year. You know, they say like turkey can make you sleepy.
Sure.
Is it possible there's another unknown side effect of turkey that affects your composure in front of goal? We need to investigate that.
We need to find out which of the players had turkey for Christmas dinner. Is this what you're saying?
I don't know. I just think it's odd, right? And I want to be consistent, because I think for quite a lot of the season, the issue with Arsenal has been maybe chance creation. You know, there's certainly been games where we've said, well, did we have a big chance? You know, we had all that possession, we had a few attempts, but how many of them were from really good positions? And we've well, I've kind of been a bit frustrated at our ability to manufacture chances, particularly from open play. But then you look at a game like this, or maybe Newcastle, and a lot of those chances, we did have chances, we just didn't take them at all. So it's almost like we found another way to fail to win, and it's pretty dispiriting. I remember after the Brighton game and dropping a point there, and yes, Liverpool dropped points the following day as well against Manchester United, but there was that feeling of, well, we've got a week now in the Cups to really kind of course correct and move ourselves towards some potential silverware this season. And actually, as it's transpired, we feel significantly further away.
Yes, we do. Obviously, we're still in the Carabao Cup, but hanging on to Newcastle's coattails after losing that game 2-0 out of the FA Cup. Just, something you said there about this time of year and these kinds of little blips in form, or we go through, I've seen people describe it as the yips, like a golfer when he can't make a putt. We have that kind of issue in front of goal at this moment in time. But I think what it is not so much this time of the year, but we have experienced this under Mikel Arteta in different phases of the period that he has been in charge. I don't think it's just a January thing. I think it's slightly coincidental that it's happened this season and last season. But, there have been other periods where all of a sudden we seem to hit the wall from an attacking perspective, and for various reasons, whether it's personnel, whether it's injuries, whether it's form, but these little pockets of I don't know what to call them exactly, where we really, really struggle in front of goal, have been part of the Mikel Arteta experience, if you want to call it that, since he took over. And like I said, there are myriad reasons for that, but it is a kind of recurring theme.
It is. Pockets of profligacy.
Yes. Yeah.
I am reminded of a tweet I think I saw last night from Mike McDonald, who writes a very good Arsenal blog that I enjoy. And he said something to the effect of, is this what happens when you have two strikers who have very good all-round games, but if you had to say what the weakness in their game is, you'd probably say finishing. I mean, is that just where we're at? That we've... And again, maybe that is to do with the type of team and the type of manager we have, that we've had such an emphasis on other aspects of forward play that maybe we've kind of ended up in a situation where we're absent.
Yeah, maybe.
Killer touch.
Sure.
I think the whole game for me is crystallised actually in Manchester United's goal. That is a preposterous finish. It is so difficult what Bruno Fernandes does there. The pass is not very good. It's got a bobble on it. And he takes it first time and just opens his body and places it into the far top corner. And I do find myself asking, who would I back to score that goal in this Arsenal team?
It's a great question.
And it's not just a question of confidence and mood and time of year and form and all those things. On a pure sort of talent level, who is it who is in those positions so composed, so reliable that they will take that shot on and finish it? I don't think there's many.
No, that's true. I mean, it is grudgingly a superb finish, because I hadn't quite noticed the bobble. I'm just looking at it here again. And the control and the precision of that finish is excellent. I mean, it's not that long ago. Maybe we had a little bit of a discussion about Kai Havertz, and we said, I can't remember which game it was and which goal it was that he scored, as our leading goal scorer this season, by the way, where we talked about Havertz and said, this time last year, would he have scored that goal? Was he in a position to put that ball away with the kind of confidence that we saw from whatever goal it was that we saw him score, right? And
here
we are.
I can't remember who it was against, but I remember the goal. It's like the one where he kind of shifts it onto his left foot and bends it into the near post. It's a really nice sort of Van Persie-esque finish. I would say, is that the exception that proves the rule to a certain extent?
Maybe. Look, I think there's no question Havertz is a bit of a confidence player, and this week will have absolutely sapped all the confidence out of him. But, I think as well, you have to acknowledge that despite the fact he's had a terrible week and missed the kinds of chances that will give him nightmares, he is capable of better. He is capable of doing more. The question is, what else do we have when we don't have a confident Kai Havertz? What else have we got up front who can cause the opposition problems? I think it's sort of too easy to say, right, we've got to write Havertz off now. Maybe it's not a question of writing Havertz off. It's a question of what do we do, or how do we augment what we get from Havertz with somebody else or with different kinds of players? I think the thing that struck me yesterday was we're just not quite clinical enough in what we do and how we do it. Not just in the final third, and not just with the chances that we have. I think there are things that we can do better in all areas of the pitch, to be honest.
I mean, on Kai, I just feel like he's perfectly functional as a centre forward. Like he ticks so many of the boxes, right? As sort of Mike McDonald said, he ticks almost every box you'd want, except maybe one, in terms of being a regularly clinical finisher. And I think you can afford that if you've surrounded him with the right players. I mean, Roberto Firmino was not a clinical finisher for Liverpool, but he played with Salah and Mane on either side. And frankly, it didn't matter. You can make that choice. I just think Arsenal have ended up in a position where, especially with Bukayo Saka out, they neither have sort of devastating finishing and goal scoring ability from the flanks. And you can debate if they have enough of that, even with Saka available, but nor do they have it at centre forward. Yeah. And I think that is an issue. But I think your point about being clinical enough in general is almost more interesting. Like, obviously everyone will have seen the stats from this game and from the Newcastle game. Overwhelmingly in favour of Arsenal, and the underlying metrics, the expected goals. I think it was another 3 or 4, albeit one being a penalty, expected goals that we racked up, as it were, against United. And yet we end up with just the one scored via a deflection from a centre half. I mean, I don't know where you're at with that. I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, I feel a bit like those numbers really don't tell the full story.
I agree. I agree with that. Like, I think you can say, if you're looking for mitigation, another day we would score a goal or two. I think, play that game again 8 times, 9 times out of 10, and we make at least one of those chances in the second half, whether it's the Rice header, the first Havertz one that he sliced wide from Marino, the second Havertz one, the Trossard one, which is, I think, brilliantly defended, but maybe we could have done a bit more on. The penalty itself. Another day we win that game and we're talking about things in a very different way. Yeah, there were quite a few opportunities in this half. But ultimately, XG is an interesting stat, but G is the only real stat that matters, right? And we're struggling to convert those chances. I'd have been maybe more worried yesterday if we didn't create chances against the 10-man Manchester United. I'm not saying it would have been any more or less frustrating, but when we talk about the need to be a bit more clinical in what we do, it's sort of decision making, isn't it? There was I'm sure you've seen the clip, it's been doing the rounds this morning, of Martin Odegaard taking the ball, driving through midfield. I think he had a pass either outside to Martinelli or a pass to Declan Rice, turned around and went down the other side. And those small little things allow the opposition the opportunity to get back and get set and get defensively sorted again, and those key moments in games where you can really, really stretch the opposition. Because if we'd worked it out to the left-hand side there was Rice, there was Trossard, there was Martinelli. We had an overlap down that side, and we, for whatever reason, Martin Odegaard decided to go the other way. So those are small things as well that I think we can look at and maybe analyse a little bit more. But let's talk first half.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there wasn't a great deal going on. There was a goal that was disallowed for offside, which I think is, clearly an offside goal, despite the fact the ball came off Maguire. I don't think it's a deliberate, pass back or anything like that from Maguire. He's just sort of in the way. And Martinelli is quite a way offside. So it's one of those where if that goal had been given against Arsenal, I think we'd all be going absolutely crazy. So we accept that as an offside goal. The big talking point of the first half, though, is Gabriel Jesus and the fact that he was stretchered off, head in hands, with what looks like a very serious injury.
Yeah, and it's a real shame because in terms of the starting lineup, that was one thing I was really excited to see. Him on the right-hand side. I think it's quite logical to play him there. He played there regularly for Manchester City. And I was curious to see how that would work with both him and Havertz in the front three. He went down a little bit before, in a sort of incidental coming together, and actually his head went to his hands at that point, and the physio was testing the knee and doing all the little flexes and bends that they do, and so I sort of expected him to come off, to be honest, because it was right in front of the press box, and I could see the pain that Jesus was in and the level of concern I think that he had. I don't know whether he had done any real damage at that point or not, but then 5-10 minutes later, he gets in a tangle with Bruno Fernandes. It looks to me like as his right leg's coming down, he jars it effectively.
Yeah.
Just lands with his weight on it. And then quite distressing scenes follow, really, in terms of seeing him stretchered from the field, obviously devastated and in a lot of pain, as Mikel Arteta said afterwards.
It's hard to know, because, I get what you're saying. And I think sometimes, look, we've had the discussion before, haven't we, about a player who gets injured and then carries on and then gets more injured. It's happened more than once. He did look to be moving okay when he was chasing Fernandes back. I mean, he fouled him. It's fair. And there was that whole amusing incident where Fernandes was throwing his boot around. So he was moving all right. It wasn't like he was hobbling back. But again, it might just be a case that something that he was feeling a little bit was exacerbated by that second incident. And, when a player goes off with his head in his hands and he's on a stretcher, players know, don't they? Players know when something has gone badly wrong, and we can keep fingers crossed and we can hope that it isn't as serious as it looks, but it's really hard today not to fear that is, potential season ender for Gabriel Jesus, and the implications of that maybe we can discuss a little bit later on. But the sad part is, it does look as if his season could well be over at this point.
Well, that would be really sad, especially after him experiencing a little bit of a renaissance in some ways, with that week in which he scored a few goals and played his way back into contention effectively as a starter for Arsenal. It would be really sad. If I'm looking for any glimmer of hope, it would come in the fact that Mikel Arteta said he believed it was the other knee, as opposed to the one that he injured at the World Cup in 2022. And maybe psychologically, I can understand why, given his history, Jesus would absolutely fear the worst. You never know how much that might have influenced his reaction and the emotion of the moment. But it looked bad. There's no two ways about it. And we've all seen players go down with serious knee injuries, and there was a familiarity to what we saw. So, he's having scans today, and I'm not feeling particularly optimistic about
No, me neither. But fingers crossed for him and for us. But that was sort of the main talking point of the first half, where
it was a strange half in some ways, I thought. Arsenal dominant in terms of possession. But, this was a half where there weren't a great deal of chances created. And when the halftime whistle blew, it was really strange. There was like no sound from the crowd, like no approval, no disapproval, just like the whistle blew and you heard some seats.
Yeah.
And that was quite interesting. Like, I think that's an interesting sort of subplot of what's going on at the minute, that, such a positive aspect of Mikel Arteta's tenure as Arsenal manager has been the synergy between team and crowd. And at the moment, I just feel like that relationship isn't quite as healthy as it has been.
I agree with that. You can hear that, even from the TV. But is that not... How do I put this right? Like, people can talk about XG and they can talk about stats and they can talk about domination, but I think everybody who has watched this Arsenal team be so good and so entertaining the previous couple of seasons can see that it's not quite the same, that there's something missing, that there's something in the way that we're playing, whether it's the injuries, whether it's the schedule, whether it's, I guess, there could be an element of we've come so close, we're absolutely exhausted, knackered. We pushed ourselves so hard to come so close to winning the title in 2 seasons, and there is a sort of a low-level fatigue, whatever it might be, whether it's tactical, whether the manager's desire for more control, whether it's all of those things, and it could well be all of those things, right? Coming together in this sort of cocktail that means the engine is not smooth right now. We're kind of chugging along, if you like. And I think everybody can see that. Everybody can see, A, that we're having some problems scoring goals, and B, we're having some problems making that domination feel like domination. Does that make sense? Where you can have a lot of the ball, but if you're not really threatening the opposition, it feels very sterile. Whereas I think the crowd, if you're making chance after chance after chance after chance after chance, the crowd can respond to that in a positive way, albeit you're missing those chances. What I think is the issue is when those chances are missed, it sort of plays into the underlying fear that I think is present in what I guess many fans are feeling about this team's ability to turn that dominance into match-winning moments.
Yeah, and to be fair, like the crowd did really come alive in the second half when we did begin to exert more pressure and create more chances. And they were more entertained, I think. It's interesting. I think you're right about that general sense of fatigue around the club. I remember when we beat Everton on the final day of last season, in the press conference afterwards, I asked Mikel Arteta, like, are you worried about having come so close twice and not making it, and whether that could have any sort of residual effect on the team? And he was, really emphatic that it would not become a problem. And of course, that's what he has to say. But I do wonder if 6 months on, or whatever it is, I think longer than that, we are seeing some of that come to the fore. And I wonder if there's that bit of fatigue, not just among the playing group, but maybe among the crowd a little bit as well. That feeling of having been so close and not got to that final stage. And then this year, City falling by the wayside in the league at least, and yet it feeling like we are not best placed to capitalise.
Sure.
I wonder if that's having a wearing effect on the supporters, maybe, as well as those sort of on the inside. Maybe
so. And do you think it's compounded a bit by the fact that the summer business hasn't really pushed us forward in any way? That those sort of worries people had about the recruitment this summer, I think, are in January. I think we can see that there are definitely issues with that. Mikel Merino hasn't really delivered what we would have hoped he can deliver, and of course he's had the injuries and everything else, but it was a fairly indifferent display from him yesterday. Ricardo Calafiori out, injured again, and that's another period on the sidelines for him. Maybe it's temporary. I don't quite know. We'll maybe find out from Arteta at some point this week when he meets the press. Raheem Sterling came on. I want to save discussion on him till part 2 because I've got a couple of questions about him. But what you're saying, and maybe the inevitability of that fatigue and the exhaustion, whether it's physical or mental, in terms of coming so close. I think we saw this happen to Liverpool, right? Didn't we? We saw it happen to Liverpool, where when you push so hard, the following season, you find it difficult to match that level again. And to be fair, they've demonstrated you can come back from that. It doesn't have to be fatal. We're looking at them this season and they're sort of renewed and re-energized. So it's not like it can never happen again. But I do think there is perhaps something in that, along with some of the other issues that we've spoken about in terms of tactics and how we play. So second half, United get that goal quite early. I think it's Gabriel gets maybe a little bit unlucky, but potentially could have done a bit better with that header. Garnacho takes it on. It's a ball across. It's a great finish from Bruno Fernandes. That's 1-0. One of the things that doesn't seem to happen very often to us is the opposition going down to 10 men. I can't remember the last time it happened, to be honest. And Diogo Dalot, having been booked in the first half, slid into a tackle on Marino, didn't get the ball, got a second yellow card. So all of a sudden, on the hour mark, thereabouts, we're playing against 10 men. And that really felt like, okay, right, maybe things are starting to turn our way just a little bit. But unfortunately, despite the fact we got a goal from Gabriel pretty quickly after that red card, we couldn't really capitalise. Well,
I mean, you say that we had the absolute ultimate chance to win it, right, with the penalty.
Sure. What do you make of? What did you think of the penalty?
I don't think it's a penalty.
Yeah, I think it's very, very generous.
I've expressed my frustrations with video technology in football many times, and I didn't mind its absence, particularly on that penalty incident. I mean, I don't think VAR would have overturned it, to be honest. I'm sure that in the same way that the William Saliba penalty stood and they could say, there was contact, I'm sure they would say the same about that Kai Havertz one. But I thought it was very soft. You wouldn't be happy if, that was given against William Saliba.
No.
But anyway, it was a sort of great 5-minute spell or 10-minute spell, wasn't it, where they had Dalot sent off, who frankly must have just forgotten he was on a yellow card. I mean, it was an insane challenge to make.
It really was.
Gabriel gets his goal. Should he be playing up front? Arguably, yes, but at this point in time. Mm-hmm. And then we get the penalty. And at that point, you're like, everything's going to be fine. But Martin Odegaard, and I think Martin Odegaard, frankly, had a much better game than he has had for some time yesterday.
I agree with that. I think the missed penalty is the thing that people will focus on, and understandably so. But if there is any gleam of positivity from this game for me, it is that despite that other moment I talked about where he sort of turned back and went the other way, I think generally speaking, this looked more like the Martin Odegaard that we want to see on a weekly basis or a twice weekly basis, given the schedule that we have. I think he made 10 key passes in the game, which is, basically 10 chances created. And the penalty, I mean, it's not a terrible penalty. It's not the best penalty, but I think it's a good save. I think what's quite ironic about this is that goalkeeper, I think he's at fault a little bit for the goal that we score.
For sure. It's a very not great punch, is it?
No, it's not a great punch. He spent most of the day just booting the ball out for an Arsenal throw, to the point where I thought to myself, is this deliberate? Like he must have whacked it out of play 5 or 6 times, straight out for an Arsenal throw. It was weird. But the irony of that is that he produced some very, very good saves as well for Manchester United. I sort of looked at him a little bit as a bit of a weakling, particularly from set pieces, but I don't think we did enough to expose him. And he did have a good game. I think it's not a great penalty from Martin Odegaard, but it's also a good save. I think if it's up the other end, we're giving Raya a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good save. I think Odegaard, I mean, look, you always want to score a penalty, but it's not a bad penalty. It's an excellent save. And yeah, I thought it was a really strange performance from the keeper because he did make some big saves and he was probably the match winner ultimately by saving one penalty in normal time and one in the shootout. But there was a lot about his game that wasn't good. And I agree. If our set piece delivery had been better, then I think we might have capitalised on that. And actually, Odegaard, his chance creation was excellent from open play and those sort of little diagonal clip passes to the far post. I think his corner delivery
not great.
Was some way short of what Bukayo Saka offers from that side.
Yeah.
And you could see why when Ethan Ranieri's in the team, he is actually picked above Odegaard to take corners from that side.
Yes, I agree with that. So the chances, the Rice header, should he do anything different? Should he do something better? Could he head it down?
He's got to try and head it down.
Yeah, me too. That was the thing that I thought. It was like, head that down. It's a great.
If you head it down, you probably score.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because even with 10 men, there was the odd scare at the other end. They brought Dalot on and he had that counter-attack where Sterling ends up making almost a sort of accidental block in his own penalty area. It hits him. But at least he got back. And then 88 minutes was the big one, wasn't it, for Havertz? I mean, I wonder if VAR might have ruled it out had it been there, for a little push in the back of the defender beforehand. But I don't know what to say, really. I mean, he'll know as well as anybody. He's got to be scoring there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He is capable of scoring that goal. He should score that goal. He knows it as well as anybody else. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of 88 minutes and that's the game. At that point, that's unquestionably going to be the game.
Yeah, and you've had half an hour against 10 men. I mean, against this Manchester United side at 10 men, I think it's reasonable for us to say that from the point of the sending off, Arsenal should have got this done, really, in normal time. I mean, especially in extra time, but I think in normal time that should have been plenty. We had the momentum at that point. United, their threat was limited by losing a man. We had chances.
10 shots in that period between our goal actually and the between our goal and the red card basically in full time. We had 10 shots, 4 of those on target. There was a chance for Rice as well. If you remember, he went through on his left foot and the keeper made a very good save. One of those, it just sort of squeezed past the far post and you're wondering, was that a miss? But actually the keeper made a good save as well.
Yeah, he went through and sort of, I can't remember what happened actually. Did it just go across the goal, that one?
He took a left-footed shot. The keeper just stuck a hand out and it went round for another corner. And that was basically, I think, the last chance of the 90 minutes or the 90-odd minutes before we went into extra time. Extra time, there were chances as well. I think there was a good block on a Rice shot. I think it was Dalot and Dalot across. Dalot was the guy who blocked Trossard from scoring when it looked for all the world like we were going to score the goal. I think it's a Jorginho pass to Havertz. Havertz with a good ball across and Dalot. Does he show more desire to get there than Trossard?
Apparently that's what Alan Shearer said on the BBC. I didn't see
really?
it, but
okay.
Yeah, he said, in as a striker or an attacker in that position, I wouldn't allow the defender to get there ahead of me.
I think I don't want to agree necessarily with Alan Shearer, but I think he might have a point there.
I mean, Alan Shearer was 6'1" and could outmuscle any central defender probably to get to a ball. I don't know if the same is quite true for Trossard, but yeah, it was a big moment.
I think what it is that Trossard is sort of waiting to see where the ball is going to come from Havertz, so he's sort of slightly stationary to adjust his position when the ball comes across, whereas Dalot is able to get a bit of a run on him, but it's one of those where you're kind of thinking, just get that in. You've got to get that in from that kind of range, Yeah. Raya made a great save, by the way. He did. I mean, it was a really poor piece of play from Thomas Partey. Gave the ball away. United came forward. Partey, when he got back, I don't know where he was going. He chased back into the box and his positioning was terrible, and it was actually a deflection off Partey that forced Raya into making that really good save.
Yeah, I mean, we were playing by this point with, I think, Partey and essentially Martinelli as kind of fullbacks in the system. I mean, you know, we were going for it, or at least attempting to. Yeah, I don't know. By the way, I have to mention this, because I don't know if anyone else in the ground felt the same. I know Peter, the DJ at the club, is a great guy and a friend of the show, but I did find some of the music choices during extra time absolutely mad. Like, during half-time, extra time, they went for an instrumental version of Feels by Calvin Harris featuring Katy Perry, which, I don't know, it was sort of so light and poppy. I was like, this feels really at odds with the game that's being played. And then at the end of extra time, as if the players weren't nervous enough already, they had Lose Yourself by Eminem as they were like contemplating their walk up and run up. I
don't know if that had
it added to the surreal nature of what I was watching.
Sure. That and the white kit as well, I think, plays a part in this. And I'm not blaming the white kit by any means. I just think it doesn't look natural. And, no. I know we extrapolate when we lose games, but I have to say I don't like it at all. I like it.
Well, unfortunately, it's got a bad record now, hasn't it? I think
it has.
We wore it in the defeat against United, Liverpool last year. We wore it in the defeat at Nottingham Forest.
It's a great campaign and a worthy campaign and worth supporting, but maybe we can find a different way to support it next year.
Yeah, interesting. I agree with you. I think it's a very worthwhile cause. I think that people will dismiss it entirely, and I get why. But all I would say is that I think Mikel Arteta is someone who does invest quite heavily in sort of messaging and the psychology around kits. I think he's a believer in that. So I don't write it off entirely. I think I've reported previously that like he was a big fan of the black kit, for example, because of sort of the imposing message that it sent. So
yeah, I mean, he basically nixed that kind of peachy, pinky kit we had that season.
We didn't see a lot of it, did we?
No, it was like put to one side. I think we played against. Did we play against Bournemouth and Saliba scored a goal and it was a nice, or Brentford maybe, I can't remember, one of those, but it was a nice happy day. But after that, we never saw that kit, and from what I understand, that was the manager's edict.
So I don't think it's a total red herring, that, but no. Obviously there's
not
still
the
a lot
reason.
of factors in Arsenal control, and it's we don't after the whole Carabao Cup ball business, we don't want to make it sound like we're looking for any kind of excuses. But,
no, that's not it. But I think
what's the FA Cup ball like, by the way? It didn't come up in the press conference yesterday.
Well, they kept talking about how it was a special ball because it's
a mitre ball, I think.
Yeah, it was, but apparently it's got some gold trim on it because Manchester United are the FA Cup holders, and they kept talking about that. But again, I don't think it's.
The gold was dazzling our eyes, Andrew.
That's what it was.
Every time it fell in front of goal.
Exactly. The gold trim on the ball was to blame. I mean, what did you make of the second half of extra time? I don't feel like we necessarily turned the screw.
I haven't got many notes here. I think once it got to half-time in extra time, I was like, United are going to see this out. Like, they were, down to 10 men. I think from any time after the sending off, they were ready to take penalties. Especially when you've got a keeper who saved one in normal time. Do you know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. I think psychologically going into a shootout, that is big. And I think half-time in extra time, it felt like job done for them. I think we were tired. I think we are tired. Like, that's something I really observed in this game. There was a couple of moments. There was one moment where Arsenal broke. I think this was in the first half of the game. It was a counter-attack, and maybe Martinelli broke away. And nobody in a white shirt could keep up with him at all. Like, I think literally, I remember looking and there were like 8 men still in our half as we were trying to counter-attack. And similarly, when they had that counter-attack in the second half and Sterling blocked the shot. I was watching players like Jorginho and others trying to get back. I mean, I don't know if it's just tiredness when it comes to Jorginho, but it was really striking to me. I was like, there's not a lot of legs in this team right now. And maybe that is why we sort of fizzled out slightly in extra time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a through line between confidence and results and how much you feel in your legs. True. When you're winning, it's easy. Yeah. And when you're not winning and not playing as well as you can, legs can feel a little bit heavy. I mean, he did make an interesting change in the second half of extra time. I think it was just that. He brought Kieran Tierney on.
Yeah, that was interesting.
What did you make of that? I mean, obviously it was to do with Jorginho going off injured, so it wasn't necessarily a tactical change. But what did you make of Tierney coming on ahead of Alexander Zinchenko? Did that occur to you? Did you think about that at all?
Well, it did, because I was sat next to Jordan Campbell and we were chatting about, once they'd made the Sterling for Jesus change, which was forced, you looked at the bench from an attacking perspective and it was basically just Trossard, right? Yeah. You were like, there's not a lot to turn to there.
There was a young striker from the academy.
Right.
Butler Oyedeji.
Is he a striker? I don't even know.
I think so, yeah.
Right, well, there you go. You're ahead of me. But he is a striker. Well done. But, maybe given the sort of magnitude of the game, the significance of the game, he wasn't likely to get on. And actually, we were chatting about Tierney as an option. He's someone who can run and give you an overlap, give you a different dimension in a way that, Zinchenko probably isn't going to do. But I didn't think Arteta would use him. I sort of thought he was just sort of taking up a spot on the bench, to be honest. So I was a bit surprised, but I didn't mind it. I think he's our player.
I didn't mind it either. It just, if you were to, people will have their preferences over Tierney and Zinchenko, obviously, which I understand. But I do think if you were to ask people who is maybe the more creative player or the more technical player, most people would have said Zinchenko. Maybe the game was crying out for what Tierney could give down the left-hand side. There was one very good cross into the box where no Arsenal player player attacked it. But I just think sometimes you would maybe think Zinchenko is technically more likely to create something for you against a low block, packed defence, 10 men than Tierney. So I just thought it was slightly interesting when you consider the futures of both of those guys as well. What does it say about Zinchenko right now?
Well, I think that's a very pertinent point. But, I did want Zinchenko on the pitch. I probably wasn't going to say this because it feels like I'm just sort of screaming into the void. But, I think there was a logic in Tierney as a kind of overlapping fullback to keep the width and try and use that extra man to get someone in on the outside. But I am sort of... I am perplexed still at why we just won't put Zinchenko on the pitch in any other position. If you're looking at that substitutes bench, as you say, and you're looking for a player with technical skill, creativity, who can find a pass... could we not have stuck him in midfield for 20 minutes in extra time to try and pick the lock? I mean, clearly Arteta feels no. Clearly he doesn't trust him. Well, he doesn't seem to trust him at left back either, but doesn't trust him in that midfield area. But as someone who's a bit frustrated with some of the recruitment decisions we've made in midfield and maybe the profile of player that we've gone for, I do kind of find myself thinking, we could do worse. Do you know what I mean? Than just give Zinny a game there. He literally has played that position for at least half his professional career.
Yeah.
But it's clearly not an option in the manager's mind.
No, and when this manager decides that a player is not an option, he pretty much remains not an option.
But I mean that our bench generally. I mean, so we've got Butler Oyedeji, who's a striker, but frankly, not a name that is on our lips regularly as a first-team prospect. It would have been a huge call, I think, to bring him on.
Sure.
You've got, Tierney, who, for all intents and purposes, is on his way out the club. I think he could even go in January. We don't know. Zinchenko, it's clear where he is in the manager's eyes right now. What you're left with, Partey, Kivior, Rice, all defensive players. Sterling, who's barely factored into the season at all until this point. I guess we'll talk about in part 2, as you mentioned. There's not a lot there, is there?
No, there isn't. There isn't. And that is part of the problem. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think it was necessarily the reason that we didn't win this game yesterday. I think the players who were on the pitch had the ability and have the talent and have the quality, generally speaking, to have won that game. They didn't, and that's a problem, obviously. So we go to penalties. I don't know there's any need necessarily to go through this on a forensic basis, but I have to say I didn't really get David Raya in this shootout. No. I mean, he was so good in the shootout against Porto last season. He saved at least 2, didn't he? And was really, really impressive. Like, if you were looking at that in isolation, just like pure isolation, you'd be saying, why is he getting out of the way of those shots rather than trying to stop them? If you'd never watched football before in your life and you told somebody, right, that guy there with the gloves on, his job is A, to let the ball in, or B, stop the ball going in. If you'd never seen football before, you'd go with, well, yeah, he's letting them in. He's doing a great job.
The ball is lava. Yeah. I mean, he was almost diving as the players were walking up from the centre circle. He went very early.
Very strange. Like, I guess that's part of the discussion he must have had with Iñaki Kenya. They must have prepared for this to some extent.
I think maybe United had prepared for him because, he was very good against Porto. Maybe they watched that and thought, okay, he goes early. I'd need to watch both shootouts back to really see that through line. But maybe they decided, keep your eyes on David. He'll tell you where the space is. It was uncanny. I mean, he went early and it went the wrong way on pretty much every one, which makes me think maybe United had something up their sleeve there.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about the shootout? I mean, I've got to be honest and say, I don't know who was down to be our fifth taker, and maybe it tells you something about our attack. I was personally a little bit surprised that we didn't see Martinelli or Trossard or Sterling. The attackers we've got on the pitch. The fact that we had like Thomas Partey taking a penalty before them doesn't quite sit right with me.
I agree. I mean, if Sterling wants to take a free kick from 25 yards, step up and take a penalty.
Yeah, I mean,
I wondered
one
where
of them was fifth, presumably.
Yeah, I guess so.
But 2 of them weren't, right? And I don't think that's great.
I mean, I think Martinelli has taken penalty? He's taken a couple of penalties before for Arsenal. Yeah, I mean, look, fair play to Odegaard. He stepped up after missing in the second half. Stepped up, took the first penalty. The Havertz penalty, I don't think it's the worst penalty I've ever seen, but maybe it lacked a little bit of power. I think the placement was good. It was the power that allowed the goalkeeper to get over and make a good save. I think it's a good save from an okay-ish penalty, but really, really summed up his day. United took advantage of Raya's just moving the other way. Saw a lot of questions about people not liking stuttery run-ups when it comes to penalties. They just want players to fucking run up and leather it, which I kind of understand. Do you have any issue with that kind of stuttery run-up penalty taking technique?
I don't really. I mean, it's worked for enough people, right, over the years that I don't have a particular issue with it. I do think that, I mean, it's Russian roulette, isn't it? Penalties to an extent. I mean, the goal is going to go one way, and if you go that way and you're not right in the corner, you're in trouble. So I don't care how you run up, put it in the corner. Like Declan Rice took a brilliant penalty.
Yeah, put it in the corner with power.
Yeah. You know, Harry Kane, as much as it might pain us, I mean, we know ourselves, he scored about 1 million of them against us.
Yeah.
If you hit it hard and hit it in the corner, there's not a lot that anyone can do. So I don't really care about the run-up unless it affects the way you actually strike the ball.
Yes, I agree. I just looked up Martinelli has taken one penalty for Arsenal in a 5-1 win over Everton. I think it was the final day of the season a couple of years ago. So,
but yeah, listen, Havertz proves the difference. Joshua Zirkzee somehow scores his penalty because he's absolutely terrible, that bloke. And
we're out.
We're out, and I have to watch 10,000 odd United fans celebrating at the Emirates.
So, I mean, could that day have gone any worse? I mean,
Not really, Andrew.
Could that day have gone any worse? I mean, we're out of the FA Cup against the 10-man team. We lose Jesus to injury. There's talk of an injury for Timber, a hamstring strain for Timber. Jorginho's gone off injured. The confidence issues that we have are piled on again because we can't get the ball in the back of the net. Havertz looks like shell-shocked guy. We've played an extra 30 minutes ahead of a North London derby. There's the demoralisation of losing a penalty shootout at your own ground. If you were doing a bingo card of shit that could go wrong, I think we pretty much filled it yesterday.
Yeah. I feel like in previous years where we've been sort of leading the title race or leveling the title race, there have been times where Arsenal fans could kind of not take or leave the FA Cup, could have made their peace with going out the FA Cup. I even wonder if we'd beaten Newcastle comfortably on Wednesday night, you know, would there be a bit more philosophy around this game of, well, you know, it's penalties, we create a lot of chances.
It's a cup tie, that can happen, you know.
Yeah, I think in the context of the week, it was just a total disaster, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
A total disaster. There's no other way of putting it. It was a really, really bad result. The circumstances and the context of it, you know, to go out against 10 men, to miss a penalty, to miss the chances, it's just like, oh.
Yeah, the extra minutes at a busy time when you're already looking fatigued, squad looks stretched, morale among the fans, among the players is about as low as it's been for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good few days. Mm-hmm.
Should we save some more discussion? Because I did want to ask you about Mikel Arteta's post-match comments, because obviously in the light of the Jesus injury, there was a question about a forward or a signing or a striker, you know, which is inevitable. So will we save that for part 2 and then get on with some of the other questions?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. We will take a little break here, and we will be back with your questions and more in part 2 right after this. Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 of the show where we answer the questions that you send to us on Blue Sky at arseblog.com and at gunnerblog.bsky.social. Also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. Before we get into the listener questions, I did want to ask you a question about the manager's response to the defeat. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how much he loves his players and, you know, those kinds of things that I guess in the white hot immediate aftermath of a game, people are like, oh God, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear that. But I think publicly, just a couple of days before a North London derby, if we accept that there is a level of low morale, disappointment, all of those things, you know, felt amongst the players because they've essentially, well, nearly gone out of 2 cup competitions in 1 week. Definitely out of one, almost out of another. You know, they're going to be feeling that. They're going to be feeling low. So publicly, I don't think he's got any other thing to say other than give them his backing and talk them up as much as possible, because they've got a job to do on Wednesday and beyond, and he can't for 1 second allow them to feel sorry for themselves.
That's very true. I agree with that.
Right. But then he was asked about, you know, in the wake of the Jesus injury, He was asked about the need for another striker coming in. This was the answer to that question. Again, he talks about loving his players, but I think something he says at the end is quite interesting. So we'll delve into that. 1 second.
They lack an ordinary striker. Is that an area that you need to look at this month?
No, but I mean we miss from various ways from different players, and I understand, guys, that, but I cannot love our players more, and I very much focus in the ones that we have to perform at the highest level. That's it. The rest is not in our hands, in my hands.
So the rest is not in our hands. The rest is not in my hands. What was your reading of what that meant exactly? It's not always easy, but did that stand out to you? Because it stood out to me.
I'm not sure, because he could just mean that the market is not in the club's hands.
Sure.
You can't determine availability and things like that. However, there is another interpretation of that, and I imagine he'll be asked to clarify maybe what he meant at his next press conference. Because what did you infer from it?
I just wondered if there is a question of not backing from the board, or maybe he's just talking about the resources not being available. I don't know if the resources are available. I don't know what money there is to spend in January. Maybe that was it. I'm not saying he's saying, right, I've been asking for this, that, and the other, and the board and the owners have said no. I just thought it was an interesting turn of phrase in the context of the search for an addition to his team. So I want to just expand this, because we have a question from Mr. Snrub. And he says, terrible morning, gents. Now that I've stepped out from crying into a cupboard, do you think Arteta recognises the need for a striker / forward? Or do you think he believes we are okay with what we have in that position? And that maybe expands this discussion outwards a bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he does recognise it. And frankly, if he doesn't after the Gabriel Jesus injury, then I don't know. I'll have some of what he's having if that's what he thinks. I mean, I'm sure he does. I think any manager, I don't know any manager apart from maybe Arsene Wenger, who would go into a transfer window thinking, oh, I hope we don't get anyone. Do you know what I mean? They always want a player. They always want more. They always want a difference maker. And I don't think Mikel Arteta is any different. And I think there's a lot of precedent for him sort of managing upwards and, speaking about the importance of transfer windows and the importance of making forward steps whenever it's possible. And if he didn't go that hard on it yesterday after the game, maybe, frankly, it's because the situation speaks for itself at this point in time. The board of directors have just watched Gabriel Jesus be stretchered from the field. I don't think there's much Mikel Arteta needs to say. You know what I mean? It's laid very bare, quite how bare we are. Now, in terms of sort of, is the money there, is the budget there? I find it interesting because you have always these financial experts, Swiss Ramble and the like, who do their analysis on, PSR. Where do Arsenal sit in relation to PSR regulations? First thing I'd say on that is that it is being done from the outside, and the PSR regulations for the Premier League are not the same as the PSR regulations for Europe, and Arsenal have to be mindful of both of those things. But the main thing is, PSR is not the only factor that determines budget, right? The goal for the owners, the goal for the club is not just let's spend as much money as humanly possible while staying within the rules. That's never how the owners have seen this club. And I think that, just because we're within PSR spending caps doesn't necessarily mean the owners are going to say, well, here's as much money as you want. And I think if Arteta is alluding to a difficulty doing business, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's like, listen, we've bankrolled several £100 million of expenditure to get the club back on an even keel, back in the Champions League. Maybe they're not eager to do that again. I don't know, but that's what it looks like from where I'm stood.
Do you not have to react to circumstances, though? Is part of top-level sport not about the ability to manage your resources in the context of how a season plays out. So if all of a sudden, we're going into the January transfer window and all of our defenders, let's say, are injured, there would be calls to buy a defender, right? To help bolster the back line. We're going into, or we are currently in, rather, the January transfer window with Bukayo Saka, who's our best player, sidelined for who knows how long. Ethan Nwaneri sidelined for who knows how long, maybe another couple of weeks. We've got Gabriel Jesus stretchered off, head in hands. If he's back this season, maybe we're doing well. We then have Kai Havertz, we've got Leandro Trossard, we've got Gabriel Martinelli, and we've got Raheem Sterling. There is a significant problem there. If Arsenal's issue is putting the ball in the back of the net, we have got a very considerable issue in this month. And we've spoken about the need for a signing during this window while Jesus was still fit. If, and I'm keeping fingers crossed, obviously, because I don't want him to be injured, but if it is a serious injury for Gabriel Jesus, do Arsenal not have to react?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I wasn't 100% certain prior to yesterday that Arsenal had to do something. I think it was a situation where, in my eyes, it would have been great if they could. If they couldn't, I could kind of get my head around it. I think if Jesus is out, I think it is 100%. I just don't see how you can possibly sustain, not even a title challenge, but sustain Arsenal's sort of position in the Premier League and the Champions League without it. And I think it's at the point where I'm actually prepared to be quite flexible about what that is. If it's a loan or something that, is maybe not the perfect signing, the dream signing, the ideal signing. I just think Arsenal need something now. And they'll have to act according to what the market sort of permits them to do. But yeah, that's why I think, there's only so much Mikel has to say, either publicly or privately, because you can just look at the team, the bench, what's available. It's an urgent situation now.
Let me ask you another one just before I give you a chance to ask a question here, because I referenced it in the first half. Nick Baker 11 on the Discord says, another poor performance, another injury. Did Raheem Sterling at least give you a taste of what he can do? I thought he offered something different, was direct at times, which we lacked most weeks. He also looked to make darting runs behind, but did not receive the ball, which is an ongoing issue on both wings. So what did you make of Raheem Sterling yesterday?
I actually agree with that. I thought this was one of his better showings in an Arsenal shirt. I know there's not a huge deal of competition for that, but I thought there was a bit of zip and directness to his play that was quite welcome. And, he was involved in the winning of the penalty. He had a couple of other good moments as well. So I thought this was better from him. I don't find it sort of sufficiently reassuring to be like, well, that's our problem solved. But I thought there were some positive signs. But I may be just looking for, some cause for optimism on a very dispiriting day. You were less impressed, I think.
Yeah. I will say, yes, he did try and run with the ball at times. The fact that he didn't really do anything with it was more the issue for me. I think it is you're probably right to say it's one of his more impressive showings, but I think the bar is very low. It's very low. I wasn't really that impressed. There was one where the ball fell for him in the box to have a shot. He volleyed it sideways. I just don't think... I think the fact that we're trying to find silver linings about Raheem Sterling's presence in this Arsenal team is kind of part of the problem.
Yeah, ultimately, I think you can debate, can't you, whether he or Reece Nelson would have been more use to us this season. I don't know. But the fact that it's a pretty close call suggests that his signing is not one that has moved the needle for us in any significant way.
No.
I mean, the summer business in general has been under the microscope this week, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if we had a question about that.
I mean,
I saw this extraordinary stat, which I hope is right, because I'm going to quote it like it is. And we've played 31 games, I think, in all competitions. 12 starts for Calafiori, 12 starts for Marino, 5 starts for Sterling, 0 starts for Neto. And, I think that tells you that the business that we did in summer, certainly in the first half of this season, has not really had much sort of positive, tangible contribution to where we're at right now.
No, that's completely fair. Completely fair. I think all of the signings in the summer have been, to varying degrees, underwhelming. They haven't really pushed the needle in any way. And look, you can sign squad players. You can sign, like, for me, Marino is the archetypal squad player. And we talked about him a couple of weeks ago when Rice wasn't there. He came in, played well against Brentford, helped us win a game against Brentford. And that's kind of all right. You know what I mean? That's a decent contribution. But did we need more? Did we need more than that,
I do think that. And I have to say, like, if Mikel is kind of intimating, that's not in my hands, about the transfers, I do slightly bristle at that suggestion. Like, quite a lot of what happens at the club is in his hands, I would say. And, he said a couple of things in recent weeks, like, we entered the season with what does he say? Like the smallest squad in the league.
Thinnest, was it? Or something like that? I can't, yeah.
Yeah. And he's, saying last night it's not in his hands. I don't know. Like, when I look at the summer and I look at the recruitment decisions that were made, you've got Marino, who Mikel was absolutely insistent on. Calafiori, who he was absolutely insistent on. Sterling, who's a player that he'd worked with before. Neto, who he had to sign in emergency because coaching staff had spent the summer chasing after a wild goose chase for a keeper that was never going to happen. Like, my sympathies only extend so far, I would say.
To what extent then should, when we assess the summer transfer window and the business that we did, I noticed that we had a couple of questions about Edu.
Yeah, I saw that.
To what extent can we look at the sporting director? Ultimately, wasn't it towards the end of the window where Edu had to put his foot down? I think Neto comes in as the client of an agent he knows very well.
It was kind of an emergency situation by that point.
But this is what I mean, is that there were questions about, like, is everything simpatico behind the scenes? Is everything operating the way it should behind the scenes? So when you look at that summer business, and when you look at, we had to get an emergency goalkeeper right at the death, at the 11th hour, because
using up a Premier League loan.
Exactly. Because we had spent all summer chasing after a goalkeeper that, while he was available, was going to cost us 25 million euros, which is absurd, for a backup goalkeeper. And right at the 11th hour, we bolster our attacking options, in inverted commas, with the loan of Raheem Sterling from Chelsea, which could not possibly have been top of the list or anywhere near top of the list when the club were putting together its transfer targets going into last summer. So how do we view that business overall, between the manager's influence, the sporting director's influence, and maybe the need for somebody to kind of put their foot down and say, no, this is what we need to do and this is how we need to do it.
Oh,
and of course, let me just say as well, it was an international tournament summer as well. So there is that, which is some slight mitigation for some of what happened.
Well, look, clearly, there was some shift in spending policy this summer. Like, there's no doubt about that. When you look at the business Arsenal did versus what came in and the timing of the deals, where we had to sort of effectively line up sales in order to buy people. You know, Smith Rowe, Calafiori, I think with Marino, I forget, but maybe it was sort of Eddie, and you know, there was money coming in, that's for sure. Clearly, there was a decision that we weren't going to end the summer window with a massive deficit, right? That was a change. The club is moving back towards a more sustainable model, which has always been the long-term aspiration for the owners, right? As far as I can tell, that's never changed. And I think the spending we've seen in recent years has been a kind of almost like emergency spending to sort of stop the bleeding, you know, and keep that Champions League money coming in. As for the summer, I do think that the thinking and the strategy this summer does feel like it was a bit more disjointed than it's ever been, you know, or certainly than it's been in the kind of Edu Arteta era.
Yeah.
And it does feel like maybe people were pulling in different directions slightly. And I think Edu's departure off the back of it kind of seals my view on that. You know what I mean? Like, I know there's millions of other reasons for him to go, right? Many of them financial. But I don't think we should turn a blind eye to the fact that Edu sort of walked away from this project before it arrived at completion. There must have been some frustrations there, in my opinion.
Yeah, we had a question from Joe Ramy.bsky.social saying Edu's departure has never sat quite right with me. I've never believed the narrative surrounding his departure. Do you think there are maybe problems brewing and he jumped ship?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't want to give the wrong impression. Like, it's not like there was a war within the club or anything like that. Yeah. But I do think that, you know, serving the needs of the coach and serving the needs of the club are not always the same thing. And I think that the club, I think this summer window, maybe more than any other, to me felt like Mikel sort of calling the shots. And the big caveat I would offer to all this is that 12 months ago, I didn't think much of our summer business either. You know, like at that point in time, we had a crocked fullback in Julian Timber. We had Kai Havertz struggling to find out if he's a midfielder or a striker. We had David Raya not being entirely convincing as Aaron Ramsdale's replacement. And I felt a bit like this then. So I don't, you know, Wenger used to say, you've got to give people time. I just feel like some of my sort of fears about the business we've done have really come home to roost. I mean, if you'd asked me on deadline day, I would have said, well, Calafiori, really talented, but he's got injury problems. Is that going to be an issue? Marino would have been like, yeah, decent player, but is he what we need in terms of creativity and what he can offer on the ball? You know, Neto, he's cup-tied for the Carabao. I mean, we got away with that. You know, we had to play a 16-year-old at one point in the Carabao.
Yeah,
I mean, we really got away with that. That was not an ideal situation. Sterling, I think we all had our concerns, and I don't think any of us were wrong, frankly. So, yeah, it right now, if you're calling it right now, it wasn't a good summer.
Do you think that might play into some, if there are reservations about investing in January?
Wow, I hadn't thought of that.
Do you think that might be playing a part if, let's say, well, what's the buzzword people throw around? The talent ID hasn't been quite where we want it to be. And I think you do have to acknowledge that Arsenal have brought in a lot of very good players in the last number of years.
A lot more right than wrong.
Exactly. Right. So I'm not saying that's not the case, but maybe if there's a slight reservation about pushing the boat out for a particular player that Arteta might want or might have said to the board, look, can we get this guy? Can we get that guy? That maybe that is playing a part in that, where they're going, well, actually, Marino hasn't been brilliant. Yeah, Calafiori hasn't been brilliant. Sterling is kind of a busted flush at this point in his career. You know, I don't know. I don't know either, is the honest truth. And
maybe. I mean, by the way, how funny was it? I don't know if I sent you the goal during the game, but as Arsenal, conspired to miss half a dozen chances from
oh my God,
the 6-yard box, Benjamin Sesko, meanwhile in Germany, just sends an absolute thunderbolt into the top corner from 30 yards.
I mean, I was talking to Andrew Allen about this. It's like, when is the last time we had a player who could do that? He was sort of saying Alexis, which is probably right. A forward that could do it. You could get the odd long ranger from Granit Xhaka from time to time, but, someone who can just put their foot through the ball. I know that's very simplistic analysis and everything else, but do they push the boat out for Sesko in January again? If they went for him in the summer, and he maybe had reservations about how much he was going to play with the form of Kai Havertz, maybe it's gone the other way a little bit. I don't know. know.
It's just one of those sort of cruel coincidences. Speaking of the summer business, we had a couple of questions about Mikel Merino, so I figured I'd throw one at you here. So Jedward Gizzerhands said, "Goodly morning, fellas. I don't mean to blame him for our current funk or anything, but are you as concerned about Merino as me? I genuinely forgot he was playing yesterday until close to half-time. I know the left eight has fewer touches in this system than the right, but even so, his anonymity was striking. When fewer touches doesn't mean none. When Xhaka played the role, he did at least get involved. It feels like most games are just passing Merino by."
Yeah, I think it was another kind of indifferent game. I wonder if part of that, and I'm not making any excuses for him, is that there were no numbers on the back of the shirt, so it was difficult to see exactly who is who or who's on the ball at times.
Is that Merino or is that Kai Havertz?
Yeah, exactly. There was a little bit of that, but yeah, it was a slightly disappointing performance from him again, particularly because before the game there was a lot of talk about how I didn't have preseason, but I'm here now. It's all clicking. I understand what we need to do, how we need to play. I'm ready to contribute, paraphrasing a little bit. And then it was disappointing. Could he maybe have had an assist for the Havertz chance? Quite possibly. Mm-hmm. But I think generally speaking, he has been underwhelming. He's been underwhelming this season. Like Calafiori, we've seen bits from Merino which are encouraging, but overall, are you giving him more than like a baseline 5 or 6 out of 10? Not really. Same with Calafiori. Brilliant goal against Manchester City. I think we have seen flashes of what he can bring, but the fact he's been in and out of the team, it's a 6 out of 10 kind of thing. He's been fine, but nothing more than that. Sterling, who knows? But up to now, not been a good signing. Not contributed anywhere near what you would like your forward signing to contribute. So I don't know. I mean, there was a question, and I don't know if I marked it or if I just saw it. But basically, let me see.
While you look for it, I'll just say that I think was it the Sociedad manager there was a quote when we signed Merino that he had called him the best midfielder in La Liga. I think we need to get that guy in as Arsenal's head of marketing.
Yeah, head of PR.
Yeah, he knows what he's up to.
Yeah, I mean, the one I was looking at was on the Discord from Owen Setter, who said, "We haven't played the same midfield three in 2 games since the start of December and have played 8 different midfield combinations in the last 9 games." Yeah. So maybe there is an element of that to what's going on, not just with Merino, but with the team itself. And
well, I think that's a really good point. Like, I think you can make quite a strong case that Arsenal have really dithered around what to do with Declan Rice. Like, he's never really been given a run in the position he was bought to play since the first few months at Arsenal. And I just feel like that. I understand the use of his versatility and how he can do a bit of everything. He's a really good... I mean, I think he's better number 8 than Mikel Merino is on what I've seen so far.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Frankly, if I was picking my midfield, I'd pick at the moment probably be Partey, Rice, Odegaard, probably. But I think in sort of shifting him about and not having that clarity, maybe we've just not built up the understanding in that part of the pitch that is so important. So, yeah, I think that's a fair shout about the midfield.
Yeah, I mean, the relationships that you have, like, if you're constantly changing your midfield trio, then how do you build the rhythm? How do you build the relationships? How do you build the automatisms and all those kinds of things? And I know there are various reasons for it, because sometimes, players who like Partey has been needed at right back sometimes, etc., etc. But consistency of selection, yeah.
You mentioned Partey at right back. Therapy assistant. I just thought it was interesting. So throughout the course of this rollercoaster season, I found it way too easy to forget the loss of Ben White. How much is this team missing our right back? Yeah,
I think that's a good point. A really consistent part of the team.
And when we're looking at Martin Odegaard and saying, has his form been what it was? I mean, maybe that's part of it. The absence of Saka is one thing, but he's not got White behind him either. So all that kind of flanks relationships has broken down. That said, I have to be honest and say, when I look at the opposite flank, the left-hand side, I really am sort of squinting to see what we're trying to do there. And maybe, at Brighton, we had Calafiori, Marino and Martinelli, I think, all on that side. I can't think of too many times we've had that. And maybe when we see that together, it will make more sense. But we ain't seen it yet, that's for sure.
What about this one? Ben Hexam on the Discord. There's a pervasive sense on social media we have transitioned from an exciting attack-oriented style of football to a defensive one. Yet we scored the most goals in the club's history last season, and our XG this season is second only to Liverpool, even though teams play a deeper line against us than any other side. What explains this disconnect? And there was a similar kind of one on Blue Sky from Big Red Arsenal, who's at bigredarsenal.bsky.social. He says, to what extent has our inability to score goals this season been A, down to lack of attacking talent, B, injuries and general bad luck, C, coaching and tactics?
Oh, God. I mean, I can give you a really boring answer to that second one and say it's a bit of each, right? But how exactly you weigh it, I think, will depend on your own prejudices or your own sort of beliefs about the team and the manager.
Do they look overcoached to you? There's a word I've seen doing the rounds a little bit. Like, are we too wedded to prescribed patterns of play? Or are we simply unable to build the kind of attacking rhythm and fluency that we have shown in previous seasons because we're beset by injuries all over the pitch? So those consistent selections, those relationships, as we just talked about, have not been a part of our football this season. That every week it seems to be somebody's different, or we're having to, put this guy here or do without this guy or play an 18-year-old at left back. And that's no slight on Miles Lewis-Skelly, who I think has been excellent, when he's made his breakthrough this season. But there are, I think, factors that do contribute to, the lack of fluency beyond, which I don't think is an unreasonable point as well, our risk-averse football this season.
Oh, God, it's tricky, isn't it? I think we have had injuries, but we're still putting out strong 11s, in my opinion. Like, we're still putting out 11s that should be winning these games or making more of a fist of them. Like, I know Saka is a huge loss, and that is kind of a massive factor in our season. But other than that, Saliba's been there, Gabriel's been there, Rice has largely been available, Partey's been much more available than anticipated, Odegaard's played almost every game since coming back, Martinelli's been fit. There has been it's not been like half the team have been out. I think we've been able to put out decent sides. And I think, yes, they've chopped and changed, but I don't see how you compete in 4 competitions that don't have that.
You've got to rotate.
That's being a grown-up big club to a certain extent, right? And that was, we all said coming into the season, we hope Mikel rotates. Do you know what I mean? We hope he learns that maybe he doesn't have to play Rice every minute, or maybe he doesn't have to play Odegaard every minute. And I remember in the early weeks of the season, he brought Odegaard and Saka off with 20 minutes to go. And we were all clapping it, being like, this is what we want from the manager. So, I think the chopping and changing is an inevitable part of being in so many competitions and an expanded Champions League and all that kind of stuff. On the overcoach thing, I do think there may be something in that. There may be something in it. I think back to a few weeks ago when I had that sort of crazy fever dream during a game where I found myself thinking, maybe we should bring on Pepe. but it's like, what's the antidote to this? I know, an uncoachable player. And I do sometimes feel like that. Like even watching Jurriën Timber yesterday, I was sat with Jordan, we were watching him, and maybe it's fatigue and maybe that hamstring was tight before we know it. But I almost feel that if I think back to pre-season and his first few games, or even the pre-season before, there was a kind of freedom and unpredictability in terms of his movement and the areas he would pop up on the pitch that maybe isn't quite so present now. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, is he adapting? Is he meeting Arsenal meeting Arteta in the middle there, and there's an element of compromise in his inherent style? I don't know. And obviously it's a bad time for the team and it's a rough time for the manager. And so maybe, some of these judgments aren't fair. But I do sometimes feel like players get Arteta'd a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there is the danger during a difficult week of over-indexing some of the problems. And I recognise that for sure. Part of me was looking at that game yesterday thinking maybe Arteta doesn't quite believe enough in the attacking elements of his team. So he's leaned more into the defensive side of things to give him a better platform to see out games. But in not believing in the attacking elements, he's slightly undermining them in a way. Do you know what I mean? Almost like a vicious circle.
Well, he's not. Yeah, I suppose if he doesn't perceive that as our area of strength, and he, his comments before the United game, he sort of said we've spent a lot less money on attackers than any other part of the pitch. He offered that up, right? Something many of us have observed about Arsenal and about him, but he sort of said it as a fact. Maybe he's just not prepared to kind of lean into that strength because he doesn't perceive it as our strong suit. Because in terms of the breakdown of like managerial, coaching, bad luck, talent, the one I'm most interested in, I don't know if it's the biggest factor, it's hard to set percentage on it, but the one I'm most interested in is that talent element. Like, do we have truly devastating attacking players? Like I spoke about that Bruno finish, but you mentioned Alexis Sanchez thrashing a ball in from 30 yards. I mean, who in this team, I'm not saying, they're freaks, they don't happen often, but who in this team would you back to hit a ball into the top corner from 30 yards?
Nobody. No, genuinely. And you know what? I remember we had a free kick outside the United box, maybe in the second half, and Odegaard took it, put it over the bar. I think it was actually set up nicely for Sterling on the right
was
foot.
Over it as well.
Yeah, he was over it. And when you could see on TV, I don't think the United wall was positioned particularly well. So if I was Sterling, I would have said, give me that because I can go around that wall and curl it in with my side foot. But that's beside the point. I thought to myself, right, who can really hit a ball? Like if you're going to give them I don't know what Championship Manager stats are like these days because I haven't played it for a long time, but it used to be like out of 20, didn't it?
Yeah.
Like who in this Arsenal team, when it comes to shooting, has got anything more than like 13 or 14?
Great question. And like, maybe Saka. Maybe Saka,
and also maybe Nwaneri, because I've actually seen him hit the ball from distance and crack a couple of shots not too far wide. But beyond that, like I know Rice can hit the ball, scored a couple of long rangers, but they're not like the fizzy fucking still rising as it hits the back of the net kind of blasters that you're looking to see. I think what did we say about our attack for quite a while? That it was a bit 5'9", right? Until such time as we added Kai Havertz, and that's changed that. I think our attack is a bit, I don't want to use the word powder puff, but when it comes to shooting, I think we lack a level of power that many other teams have. Top teams in particular.
Quite an important thing,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe the most important thing. I mean, yeah, pure ball striking, composure, that magic X factor that makes somebody, dangerous in and around the penalty area. I don't think we have enough of that. That sort of. And listen, the players that we're citing are being like, "I'd be good if we had some of that." Are special players, Alexis Sanchez, Robin van Persie, Thierry Henry. These are special players. But that's, I guess, why they cost a lot of money.
And those are the players that
win titles,
help you win titles.
Yeah, they are. And I'll reiterate my point from a few weeks ago. I'm not asking Arsenal to buy Mo Salah now because Mo Salah wasn't Mo Salah when Liverpool bought him, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
I'm asking them to identify someone with those attributes that's in the right bracket. But I think that if we had that, who knows? Maybe Arteta would have a slightly different emphasis in terms of how he sets up the team. The style question is interesting, though, and I think it's quite interesting ahead of the derby as well, because Spurs are locked in their own sort of style debate, albeit one I think that's maybe a bit more urgent, a bit more pressing than ours. But, sometimes the football we play has a kind of sterility to it that reminds me, somewhat unsurprisingly, given that we nicked their assistant manager, of Manchester City. And during City's dominance, was always on record as being like, I don't particularly aspire to that.
Yeah,
you know
what
I mean? Like, and I have to be honest about that. And that's still how I feel. Like, I think Arteta is the right man to be managing Arsenal right now. I think he's done an amazing job. I think he's capable of doing even better. And I think he is capable of bringing trophies to the club. But based on the 5 years that I've seen and the direction of the team, I think it's more so the direction of the team and the changes he's made and the way we seem to be headed. I think his vision of football is not my platonic ideal. I think I had someone use the phrase the other day. So I have to be careful not to allow that to sort of cloud my judgment,
Yeah, I think as well, like I'd agree with quite a bit of what you said there. I think as well, part of the frustration is that, like a lot of the time under Arsene Wenger, it feels like we're so close. Like we're so close. We've got so many good things about us. The raw ingredients are there. It just needs that little extra, to get the most out of the team, or to get more out of the team, or to turn these tight games into wins for Arsenal. And that, I think, is part of where that frustration stems from as well. So
yeah, and I would just add to that, like, I don't think this is unfair analysis. Like, I don't think this is a reaction to a bad week. Because what will happen over the next few weeks is some of these players will return to form. Kai Havertz will have one go in off his knee and they'll score, another 6-7 goals until the end of the season. Or Martinelli, will find some form. Odegaard will score from open play. And we will do better than we've done this week. 100%. Right? I feel personally convinced of that because we're a good team and we've got some good players. Will it be enough for us to win the big prizes that we all want to see this team and this manager win? I'm not so sure. And I think that the danger, and I spoke about this last week, the danger is that when it starts to go a bit better, that we, as a fan base, but as a club as well, go, do you know what, actually, I think we're all right.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? When I think actually what we're landing on now, like what we said about ball striking and, finishing power and finishing ability and truly sort of elite talent level, that is true. That is true. Yeah. Like, do we have enough of that to be a Premier League champion or a Champions League winner? I'm not sure. And that is a question that, I think that is a fair comment, even when we're playing well.
Yeah, I agree. If and when, and hopefully soon, these guys start scoring goals again, those observations remain true, and those, I don't want to call them necessarily weaknesses, but things that we can improve within the squad still can be improved.
Yeah, and I know it might seem ridiculous to be like, but we're talking about 1 week here. But it's like, yeah, but 1 week could have cost us 2 competitions.
Yeah, and it's not just 1 week. Like we said, there have been, these questions have been posed even last season when we won 16 out of 18 games in the second half of the season. Those discussions and those debates were still there, because I think people could recognize that, the tightest games could be decided by that little bit of extra quality. I think was it something you wrote in The Athletic after the Bayern game or during the summer, about how Arsenal were looking for, that little bit of extra quality in the attacking third, so that when you go to Bayern Munich away after a 2-2 draw, you go a goal behind, you've got that little bit more.
Yeah,
they're looking for it. They couldn't find it, or they couldn't bring it in, or they couldn't afford it, or the player wasn't available, whatever. But, even the fact that the club are aware of that suggests that this isn't just a problem that people are talking about because we've lost a couple of cup games this week. This is because this is an issue that has needed to be addressed for quite a while.
Yeah, they know. Right? Then they can see what we see. They know we have a good attack, a record-breaking attack from last season, but there is another level there. It's clear.
It's clear. Well, look, let's see what happens between now and the end of the transfer window. We had better leave it there. We did have some questions about the North London derby, but
Fortunately, we do a preview podcast now.
We do a preview podcast over on Patreon. So when Mikel Arteta meets the press tomorrow morning at 9:30, we might have a bit more news about Gabriel Jesus. We might have a bit more news about other aspects that we can discuss. So you can join myself and Lewis for that tomorrow afternoon at some point. It's patreon.com/Arseblog. For now, though, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening. I know it's been a difficult week, but hopefully we can turn things around on Wednesday. That would make everybody feel quite a bit better. A win in a North London derby. So fingers crossed for that. In the meantime, take it easy and we will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.